and welcome to the fourth annual summit of the Massachusetts Task Force to End Loneliness and Build Community. Today is September 28th, National Good Neighbor Day, a day to celebrate the importance of being good neighbors. It is also the day we set aside each year to share our work to help all residents feel a sense of belonging in the larger Massachusetts community. I am Sandra Harris, the state president of ARP Massachusetts and co-leader of the task force. We have come a long way from the spring of 2019, when we noticed the impact of the worldwide epidemic of loneliness on the Commonwealth. Today, we have evolved into a statewide coalition of more than 103 members and thought leaders, representing over 45 statewide organizations dedicated to ensuring that all Commonwealth residents feel connected and experience a strong sense of social health. When we began this work 4 years ago, our focus was on older adults living alone. Since that time, our understanding of those most at risk for loneliness has expanded. The pandemic pulled back the curtain and highlighted more lonely spaces. So as we refocus our reach, who are the lonely people and where are they? There are older adults, especially those living alone, young people between the ages of 18 and 25, caregivers, young mothers, people of all ages living with disability, the homebound, our LGBTQ plus communities, immigrants, people of color. They are all our neighbors, and our work must include all of them. Recently, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy shared his personal story, the discoveries of his trip around the nation, and the disturbing level of loneliness he observed. His expansive advisory on the healing effect of social connections and community includes the 6 pillars to advance social connections, with detailed suggestions for communities to begin rebuilding connectivity and engagement. We are proud of the fact that our work is well aligned with Dr. Murthy's agenda for helping our country repair its damaged fabric of social togetherness. We share his call to action.
Loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. Being socially disconnected, which can range from feeling alone to being isolated, is bad both for individual and societal health. Research shows that loneliness and isolation are associated with a greater risk of heart disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. In fact, lacking connection can increase the risk of premature death to levels comparable to smoking daily. Loneliness and social isolation are also far more common than we might realize. About 1 in 2 American adults report experiencing loneliness. Everyone can be impacted across all ages, socioeconomic conditions, and geographies. This widespread disconnection presents profound threats to our health and well-being. Social connection is as fundamental to our mental and physical health as food, water, and sleep, and it affects our performance and productivity at work, school, and in our communities. Now is the time to invest in building social connection. This first ever Surgeon General's advisory on our epidemic of loneliness and isolation shows us how. The keys to connection are simple. Answer a phone call from a friend. Invite someone over to share a meal. Listen and be present during conversation. Seek out opportunities to serve others. These steps may seem small, but they're extraordinarily powerful. By strengthening our relationships, we can improve our heart and brain health, reduce our risk of diabetes and high blood pressure, boost our immune systems, and lower our risk of depression. We can build lives and communities that are healthier and happier, and we can ensure our country and the world are better poised than ever to take on the challenges that lie ahead. Visit surgeongeneral.gov/connection to learn more.
We hope you will join us as we willingly accept the Surgeon General's call to action for this national strategies. You can learn more about our work at End Loneliness MA. We will now proceed with today's program, where we will share promising practices to help identify and engage all our neighbors, leaving no one behind, share our signature project of the year, Let's Talk Massachusetts, and offer you an experiential learning opportunity so you can create your own Let's Talk conversation stations. We will end with our plans for moving forward into 2024. We ask that you stay muted unless you are a speaker, and we encourage your questions and feedback in chat. Nikki?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nikki Schultz. I'm a member of the ARP Task Force to End Loneliness and Build Community, and also Executive Director of LBFE Boston. We're a nonprofit dedicated to relieving isolation and loneliness through intergenerational programs. It's an exciting time to work in aging services in Massachusetts. In recent years, there's been an increase in grant funding available to organizations working with older adults and for programs that address social isolation. The Executive Office of Elder Affairs has done a great job advocating for aging services, and as a result, there's a lot more access to funding and resources across the Commonwealth. Some examples are the Enhancing Digital Literacy Grants and its hybrid programming for the Council on Aging, allowing more and more people to stay connected to family and loved ones. With these resources comes opportunities. Organizations are expanding, new programs are being introduced, and we're moving forward as a sector. At this inflection point, it's important to make the most of the moment, and as we move forward, ensure that no one is left behind. We need to integrate DEI best practices and accessibility into our program models and outreach efforts so that our organizations and programs are available to everyone in our community. Task Force members have advanced work in the community to address loneliness and social isolation by sharing strategies and promising practices over the last few years. I'm very pleased to be sharing the screen today with 3 of our colleagues who are doing just that within 3 different communities. This panel will be a time to learn and spark ideas on how we can all create stronger, more inclusive and accessible programs. Our panelists will share about their processes and pain points, successes, and opportunities for being culturally relevant to reach more diverse populations. They'll share their experiences on how organizations can use this insight to review and refresh future programming so that no one is left behind. Our 3 panelists that are with us today from the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, we're delighted to have Amy Ruelle. She's the President Emeritus of the National Federation of the Blind of Massachusetts, was a member of the National Board of Directors, and serves on 4 national committees. She's a product of public school education and obtained her Bachelor of Arts and a Master's of Science degrees from Smith College and Simmons College School of Social Work, respectively. Ms. Ruelle worked as a psychiatric clinician and supervisor specializing in trauma treatment for many years. She's now the Director of Social Services at Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Amy is also an Access Technology trainer and consultant and has her certification from the Access Technology Institute. In addition, she formerly worked for a Braille display manufacturer as a technical support specialist and worked as the program manager for a national literacy program at the National Braille Press for several years. We also have David Connor with us. He is the Executive Director of Outstanding Life, a virtual senior center for LGBTQ+ older adults. He's a community organizer located in Central Mass and works closely with several organizations across Massachusetts in creating inclusive spaces to uplift and celebrate LGBTQ+ people from all walks of life. David has 10 years experience in project management, including helping lead a multi-year research initiative chronicling and archiving the history of the LGBTQ+ community in Worcester. David was honored with the Advancing Equity Award from the Mass Commission on LGBTQ+ Youth in 2019, is an alumni of Leadership Worcester, class of 22, and 2023 Worcester Business Journal 40 Under 40 recipient. And finally, from La Colaborativa, we're joined by Gladys Vega. She has dedicated more than 3 decades of service to the City of Chelsea and La Colaborativa, which she joined in 1990, just 2 years after its founding. Gladys was born in Puerto Rico and came to Chelsea with her family at the age of 9. Since that time, she's made a lifelong commitment to the community in which she was raised. Being a mother of 2 has deepened her commitment to building a better future for families throughout the region. During her tenure at La Colaborativa, Gladys has assumed increasing levels of responsibility with each passing year. She moved from receptionist to community organizer to assistant executive director and ultimately executive director in 2006. So welcome and thank you to our 3 panelists today. We'll start with a brief introduction and a little bit about your organizations. And Amy, why don't we start with you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got Jamie loud and clear. Thank you.
My apologies. Okay, let me start again and make it more brief, in the interest of time. My name is Amy Rule. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the Director of Social Services at the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I've been there for 5 years. We are a statewide organization. We serve blind and visually impaired adults. Most of our clients, although not all, are 65 and older, because that is the population with the greatest number of people who acquire blindness at a later age. We have a number of services, including specialized therapy services with clinicians who have lived experience as well as clinical acumen. We have access technology department, OTs who specialize, occupational therapists who specialize in vision rehabilitation, and a volunteer program where we provide assistance with performing tasks with our members. And we are, in addition, we have 36 support groups for blind and visually impaired adults age 55 and older. And those, some are conducted in person, some on Zoom, and some by phone.
Thank you. And go ahead, David.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Connor. I am the Executive Director of Outstanding Life. We are a statewide virtual senior center located here in Massachusetts. We officially launched in June, but this has been the idea of several LGBTQ elders and activists who have been on the front lines of sort of organizing over the decades within the community. And the pandemic prompted the organization to truly begin. So we launched in June, and we have 175 members across the state so far. We have several community partners who are partnering with us to work on digital equity and inclusion, as well as get the word out about these free programs that are available online. And the idea is to combat some of the isolation and loneliness that the Surgeon General described earlier. And yeah, we've been in operations for just a few months now, and things are moving quickly. So we are getting organized and getting our teams set up so that we can work with the Massachusetts Councils on Aging across the state to pinpoint folks in the LGBTQ community who might benefit from these services.
Great, and congratulations on launching, and that's a big group in just a few months. Congratulations. I don't see Gladys with us today. Hopefully she's able to join us in a moment here, but I'd like to just move on with our first question so we can get a lot of time in. First question for both of you is, you all work within a subgroup of older adults. What do you wish people knew about working within that group, and what's important to consider when conducting outreach to these specific groups? And Amy, we'll start with you first again.
Okay. I think one of the most important things to be considered is, first of all, to challenge your own stereotypic ideas and images and your assumptions about the capacities of blind and visually impaired people. I think there's a lot of negative stereotyping about blindness and visual impairment, and consequently, I think one of the things that's most important to do is to, first of all, try not to make assumptions, but to listen to what someone tells you. Ask them what it is that you can do to be helpful, and to be sensitive to the differences that are present between individuals. You will encounter people who've been blind for a very long time, as well as people who may have just lost significant vision. And each person is unique and different. And I think it's imperative that that we all work to avoid this stereotyping and to really listen to what our population need and what is their priority.
In terms of LGBTQ elders, I think it's important to realize that the isolation is pretty severe. Even I knew that going into this work, I knew that queer people organize their lives a little bit differently, but I didn't think about some of the real challenges that older queer people face. So, many folks have been abandoned by their families. Many have avoided intimate partnerships for a myriad of reasons, dating back from their trauma to, people working actively against marriage, just several reasons. And then the other thing is to realize that a lot of LGBTQ folks have severe trauma around the AIDS epidemic, older queer people specifically, and that goes for men, women, trans folks, specifically around losing a lot of the people that they loved, friends and intimate folks. And so all of that compounded really puts us in a vulnerable situation. And the need for discourse, I think, around the heterosexual community and their relationship with queer people is something that I think is imperative that we discuss. Straightforwardly, I'd like to say just, when people are considering abandoning family members, don't. And try to work on that as a community, I think, and as a population, we need better education around that. I think a lot of people don't realize how isolated and lonely LGBTQ older folks are.
Thank you. And David, you just mentioned the work that needs to be done around both heterosexual folks in these spaces. But what are your thoughts on affinity groups and groups for general public? Is one better than the other? Or should we be working with both?
Say, ask the question again, I'm sorry.
Thinking about affinity groups, so Outstanding Life works specifically with LGBTQ plus older adults. What are your thoughts for organizations starting programs? Should we be looking at creating affinity groups for specific populations of people, general public? Is there a better way to start? I think we lost David for a moment, so we can get back to that question. We'll skip ahead. What have been some of your key successes and pain points in the development of your programs, and how have you overcome challenges?
Okay.
Oh, we got David back. Sorry,
All right, it was choppy. It's choppy, but I'm back, and I kind of got the question through it. Yeah, a lot of folks are starting to do that in the online services world as well as the aging world. So I know that, as I said before, senior centers across the state have started to really look at their relationship with LGBTQ elders and realize and address some of the neglect that has happened in the past with their services, and some of the more sacred things around living and dying, specifically hospice care and things like that. So I know that there is work that is happening across the state on this. So our goal is to, of course, work with those groups. And then I do think it's important for any organization that has outreach to this population to address some of the realities that might be happening, and do so in a way that feels safe enough for people to do that. Yeah.
Thank
If
you.
I could just make an additional comment. we hold many of our groups for people with blindness or visual impairment in senior centers. A few fewer groups now because of the impact of the pandemic and the fact that we are seeing many older adults with visual impairments who have comorbid medical conditions and transportation challenges that make it difficult for them to travel outside their homes. But I think there really is, it's important to do both. I think one of the things that cannot be overstated is the benefit of having people with visual impairments have the opportunity to commune with one another and to get support from one another from people who automatically get it. And also, though, I think because family and community networks are so important to the decrease in isolation, the normalizing of visual impairments, and trying to decrease the loneliness that so many experience, it's also really important for us to talk with family members, talk with service providers, and we've now begun to build those things into our efforts.
Thank you, Amy. And so what have been some of your key successes and pain points in the development of your programs, and how have you overcome them? David, I'll let you go first this time.
So we're pretty new, and I think it's hard to reach LGBTQ elders because we don't know exactly, the population isn't accounted for, I think. So there are offices in Boston and now Worcester that are really trying to do some of that work with the community. We have affinity groups and LGBTQ elder services in specific pockets of Massachusetts, but I do think that there's just an overall misunderstanding of where people are, and so that's why we have an opportunity with Outstanding Life, because this is a digital environment, so you can reach folks who might be in the woods somewhere, for example, and have access to a computer. But the flip side of that is that there are a lot of folks who aren't as tech savvy. So some of the work that we're doing, hopefully with Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, Cynthia Wilkerson, we are doing some digital equity work to try to get people familiar with working on this platform, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible to create as few barriers as possible for people to get online and just get to the programming themselves, so that you can just click and you're on, and then you're connected, and then you're in a program with other LGBTQ elders over an interest that you all may have. So some of the stuff that we have is hobbyists, and some of it is more serious in terms of the tone of the program, maybe some legal services as well as health and wellness stuff. But there is a true barrier when it comes to digital equity. So I think that that's part of one of the prongs that we will be working on as an organization. In addition to just putting programs on, we're trying to get people familiar with it. And there's a real fear of technology, and an understandable fear. So I think that we have to alleviate some of that as we develop.
Thank you. Amy?
David, you are brand new, and we are well over 100 years old as an organization, initially founded by Helen Keller and some of her friends, who saw that there was no support really available to people with blindness or visual impairment. And some of our successes, I guess, are that, first of all, we recognize the importance of technology and the increasing role that it plays for connecting people and helping people to remain active and involved. So we're developing a technology program where we train people to use different devices and techniques in about 8 different centers throughout the Commonwealth. We have a lot more to do, and we're constrained somewhat by lack of funding because we're a private nonprofit. But that's one thing we've been trying to do to decrease the digital divide. We also have really revamped our intake process in that we now have a person with lived experience answering our phones and providing not only information and referrals within our organization, but also to other organizations who provide services we don't have. That's increased the number of referrals that we've been able to make. In addition, we have a volunteer program in which we match volunteers with people who need assistance with doing things like shopping, reading mail, going for walks, things that become more difficult, particularly for those who have been sighted all of their lives and suddenly find themselves unable to do things without using the vision upon which they relied so much. In addition, we have occupational therapists with special training in vision rehabilitation who can go to the homes and teach people, evaluate the need for lighting, the need for magnification, help mark appliances that are otherwise inaccessible. And finally, our newest venture really is that we now have an adjustment counseling program. And really, we are one of the first, if not the first in the country with this model, in that we employ blind or visually impaired therapists who are trained at a master's level to provide counseling over the phone to people who are struggling with visual disability issues. Some of the challenges that we have are that since the pandemic subsided, we are really having much more difficulty getting volunteers who are willing to work with our population, or who have difficulty keeping up the 6-month commitment that we ask for. In addition, there are not enough low vision specialists, doctors who treat our population, and so there can often be long waiting lists for getting that all-important evaluation. In addition, we have some difficulty finding occupational therapists with this kind of training. And I would say the other thing that is challenging is that we know how much isolation and loneliness there is out there. And we try with our efforts to help our consumers to learn how to maintain connections with family and community. But there is often a lot of fear associated with doing that and venturing out and even trying to relate to friends and family. And one of the biggest fears that we hear from our consumers is that they don't really know what kind of reception they're going to receive. And they don't often know whether they're going to get the assistance they need to continue to be independent in their environment. The other issue that I think we face that we've not been able to solve is transportation. The inability to drive is a huge barrier to maintaining connections within the community. There are very few services available, and for many of our population who are not facile with things like Uber and Lyft and smartphones, they have great difficulty locating and affording the kinds of services they need for transportation. And in addition, they often need more than just a door-to-door service. One of the things we're also working on is trying to educate service providers and facilities, because I think often the assumption is that a person will always have someone with them, and that's often not the case. And so we need to teach our consumers how to advocate for themselves and how to negotiate the issues when they don't necessarily know how to, even if they arrive at the building, get into that building and get to the office or clinic that they need to go to independently. So those are the issues, as well as housing that are particularly challenging. We do not have resources to provide any kind of housing assistance, but that's a tremendous barrier and one we hear about all the time. And I think finally, I would say that one of the things that we are trying to do, but there are not enough hours in a day to do, is we work with the age-friendly cities, and we try to educate the public. We try to educate service providers and family members. As a matter of fact, I'm right now working on a presentation for family members, caregivers, and service providers to try to help to decrease the isolation and to help people to feel more welcome in these situations. But lack of money, lack of staff, and lack of time really are constraints for us in that regard.
Thank you. And I think it's important for the practitioners and everyone on this call, you know, as they're thinking of maybe looking at program models and making sure that they're accessible to everyone. I think it's really important to know the reasons why people might not show up.
Right. And even making appointments, one of the things that I often say to service providers, because I do work with a lot of service providers and provide clinical consultation when it's requested. But one of the things that's really important is to find out from the person what kind of barriers they anticipate. If you're going to have somebody go to a particular place to keep an appointment, how are they going to get there? Do they feel comfortable? Can somebody from the office meet them at the door and assist them in whatever way they need to get to a particular appointment? You know, what are the barriers in terms of if you're going to be prescribing a medication, for example, how is that dosed? Are there ways in which people can access the information they need to take it safely? So I think, and with paperwork's a huge issue. How many times have we gone into an office and somebody hands you a bunch of paperwork that you're not able to read and expects you to either have somebody with you who will fill it out and to whom you feel that trusting enough that you feel comfortable, or the expectation, for example, is that you will have somebody with you, or that if people are willing to help, you're expected to give all of your responses in a room crowded with people. So I think those are just some of the considerations that really provide barriers and also increase the fears that many people express about venturing out of their homes.
Thank you. We seem to lost David. Hopefully he can jump back in. And so I think one of the biggest questions that folks on this call have for everyone is that for organizations that are just getting started or are stretched thin on resources, their opinion, if they could do only one thing this year to include older adults from your communities, what would it be?
You know, this is so obvious, but I think be welcoming. I think that's the most important thing for our population. You know, greet the person, tell them that you're glad that they're here, ask them how you can help them, and just if someone calls, take a moment to listen to what it is that they need. It may take some time for them to get to that point, but to the extent that you can, listen to what they need, listen to their questions, and try to glean from them where to start. Because that's what we found, is that it's really important for us to start where that person is. But I think just to be welcoming, you know, when I go into a new building, and I'm fortunate, I've been blind all my life. So for me, travel is not the scary thing that it is for most people who acquire visual impairments at a later age. But, you know, when I go into a building, just to have someone speak to me and ask what assistance I might need, or to someone who just makes it clear that I am welcome and that they're happy to see me, makes a huge difference.
Thank you. And how about
Can
you,
you hear me
David?
now?
Yeah, yep, we can hear you. You're great. If someone could do
Okay,
one thing this
sorry.
year, what should it be?
Yeah, I'm having some internet connection over here issues. Amy, but I want to back up really quickly. Amy, you mentioned that volunteerism is down within your organization. Do you know why? Is that a post-pandemic reality, or is that
From what I know, from what I've heard from people across the country, is that volunteerism is down all over the place. And I wish I had a crystal ball and can tell you why. I have a couple of theories, which I'm happy to share, but I think part of it is that people have reevaluated their lives. And, you know, I think that for a lot of people, they've turned elsewhere. They've turned to meeting their own needs more than perhaps they did. And I also think there's a continued fear sometimes of connection because of the pandemic and the impacts of that. And it's really sad. We have over 140 people on our waiting list to get services, to go shopping, to get mail read, to assist them with, you know, just being able to go out and get some fresh air. And we also find that in terms of decreasing the isolation that many people fear, sometimes all they want is somebody to come and be with them and sit with them. And that's something we had a telefriend program during the pandemic, but people really want people to show up at their homes. And we find that for very lonely people, some of whom are quite depressed, they overwhelm the volunteers. And so we really can't offer that as a service because the volunteers don't feel equipped to really provide the level of emotional support that many of our people need.
And I'm seeing some movement in the chat too, that this isn't unique to the folks on this panel. Mary says that she's in several volunteer groups with the same problem, activating volunteers, and Linda at Mystic Valley Elder Services is sharing the same thing.
I asked that question because we've been discussing that as we develop, you know, how to engage with volunteers. Is it wise to perhaps offer a stipend and or some support along the way? We're so new, so we're just trying to figure it out, and it's really helpful to hear this. And then I want to address Caitlin's question in the chat, which is any tips or ideas for outreach to the population, the LGBTQ older population. Pride is always a good one. So we have several prides across Massachusetts, and there is a coalition, so to speak, of organizers across the state who are really working, I would say, you know, in response to what's happening in today's political climate. Massachusetts is a very organized state. I'm originally from Texas, so I see it on different levels, and here it's really impressive. And you do have elder groups within the community who have, again, been on the front lines for a while. So you have a group called the Elders of Color. Look at Massachusetts, Multicultural AIDS Coalition. They do work with the elder population, AIDS Project Worcester. And then within those groups, you have like Ethos and Stonewall Seniors. So you have quite a few around the state. And as you're asking that question, I'm thinking maybe we should be posting these on our website so that people have access to them. So noted. And then anything that we could walk away from today is very similar to what Amy is saying. Display a lot of listening before assuming with the population. Again, there's been a lot of there's a lot of history there with the organization, or sorry, with the population. And I think that one thing to note that I'm noticing just within the work is that as a result of today's political climate, this population is feeling truly vulnerable, and they're feeling like the work that they've put in over the decades to get us ahead is about to be rolled back. So please keep that in mind when you are dealing with the population, because there's a lot of fear around what's happening today. And so some of the so there might be projections around that. There might be all kinds of unspoken things that happen in conversations, but some of it is around what's happening in today's political climate. And I think it's imperative that we really understand that. And I'm just learning more and more every day about what people are really feeling.
Great, thank you. And I think that's both very good advice for people that maybe don't know how to get started, don't know how to begin outreach. I'm going to move. We have quite a few questions that are coming up in the chat, and I also want to thank everyone who's been sharing resources along the way. Cynthia, you've put a few up. Thank you for that. And also, there's some great ideas in how we can work together to address some of these issues. So keep coming with the ideas, everyone. I think this is a great forum for us all to be together. We don't do this very often, so it's the time to reach out and collaborate. I have a question here for Amy. If someone has a visible issue with ability, like mobility, what's the right way to proactively approach the person and ask what accommodations would be helpful? This person just stating, don't want to assume, imply that they aren't capable.
I think the best thing to do is to ask the person if there's something that they need. I think for most people, sometimes when people acquire a visual impairment and they're new to it, they can be quite sensitive and quite angry and quite upset. So in those instances, perhaps you have to be careful with your wording. But I think the most important thing is if you see someone, hey, how can I be of assistance to you? How can I help you? And if they say, I'm fine, then I think unless, they're about ready to fall into the train tracks, I think you let them navigate on their own. I think the most important thing, and we find this with the public all the time and with our volunteers, sometimes they want to do things that the person doesn't need. One of the myths about visual impairment is when someone says the word blind, even legally blind, people think that means you have no vision. And actually, about 90% of people with visual impairments do have some usable vision. And everybody is different. Some people need light, some people find light and glare very difficult. So the way in which you might help one person will be very different from the way in which you would help another. I do think there are a couple of tips that are helpful. So if you're walking beside someone and into a room, it can be very helpful if they ask to get assistance finding a seat, that you put their hand on the back of the chair. The one thing I will say is, if at all possible, do not grab somebody. That's probably one of the worst things you can do. It is particularly frightening and it is intrusive, and I think it can actually be traumatic for people. And we also know that the people who have some of the greatest difficulties with transitioning into visual impairment are people who have experienced past traumas.
Thank you, Amy. And again, I think, the tips on what to do and also on what not to do is important. And help dispel some, preconceived notions or misconceptions. So thank you for sharing that. David, I have a question.
What not to
Oh,
do, I'll make one very quick comment.
Sure.
So one thing that's really helpful is do not walk away from someone without telling them that you're doing so. Because they may not be aware that you're no longer there, and they may be talking to the wall or the air and not know it. And also, it's really helpful, particularly for people who are new to visual impairment. When you come up to someone, identify yourself, say who you are and what your function is. Because many people have to learn to recognize voices and to use other senses to connect with people when they're accustomed to using their vision for everything.
Thank you. Great advice. Great tips. David, I have a question for you from the chat. How are peer support models being used to address isolation, and who organizes them for quality and psychological safety?
That's a great question. One of the things that we have seen already, just in the short time that we've existed, is folks finding us online and being in severe distress. There's a resource that Cynthia put into the chat earlier, Springwell. They're an organization here in Massachusetts that have a lot of resources connected to anyone who's struggling. So that is something that we know is going to come our way. So we're really trying to get prepared with community partners and addressing some of this need. Springwell is a great resource across the state. And I don't know if people know the name, but her name is Julie Nowak. She's she can point you in the direction of where you need to go immediately. And she's been a great resource, and she's on our steering committee as well.
Thank you. Jean, I see you have a hand raised. You have a question?
Yes, thank you, Nikki. This is actually being very grateful to Amy for all the tips she has shared with us. Because there is this very important point that we want to maintain that person's dignity and independence. And I'm always afraid what to do. I want to help, but I don't know how to. And I think the fundamental core principles that you just outlined, Amy, for helping, for being respectful, for being human, I cannot tell you how much it's appreciated. Very, very much appreciated.
Well, thank you. I think, one of the things that also is really important is when you think about it, for older people who lost vision is such a dominant sense. And most people use vision for everything until they can't. And one of the concerns that people have, and often they're not able to articulate it, or it may be subconscious, but they feel like they've lost control. And so that's another reason why it's so important to help people to maintain their dignity and to allow them to be as independent as possible. And I think that cannot be overstated. I also want to comment just briefly about the peer model. We find that peer support needs to be woven into every service that we offer. So our technology specialists are blind or visually impaired, the vast majority of them. Our therapists are, as I've said. We have groups, the peer support groups are all led by people with visual impairments. And I think that model, and actually just the opportunity for people to realize that there are other people who can mentor them and who are leading successful lives, is a tremendous relief. I can't tell you, I always joke that I've never been in a job before where my blindness was seen as such an asset. I often go to different groups and present. And the other day I walked into to the room, and I had I was presenting some technology, and one of the gentlemen who was already seated said, "Are you the presenter?" And I said that I was. And he said, "Wait a minute, are you blind?" And I said, "Yes." And he was surprised because I had come from quite a distance. And what I noticed was that after I sat down, he immediately moved to sit next to me so he could ask me more questions, and was actually excited. And I found out later that he had been quite reticent to speak up in the past. And I think the power of peer support cannot be overstated.
Thank you. And
Similar to what Amy is saying, the idea behind Outstanding Life is that the programs are led by older LGBTQ folks as well. So we're training folks to understand the technology. The platform itself sort of works like Facebook, and we did that intentionally so that we know that the elder population is familiar enough with Facebook to get on, create a profile, and attend a program. So we try to make it as simple as possible for people to access it. And then we want folks to lead programs, whether they're volunteer or through their work, like the folks at LBFE. We have an intergenerational series that's led by Stephanie Hugh, who is little brother, Friends of the Elderly, and does a really great job. And that's her day job in person, but also now virtual. So we're trying to basically create a model that replicates itself as well. So going from apprehensive to being a part of this to just perhaps running your own program if you have a special skill or something.
And David, for you mentioned that one of the challenges that you face is just the tech access and literacy. Do you in the beginning or even still, do you have like technical support programs on like how to log on, how to create that profile before you even get started going to a program?
Yeah, just basic instructions in our mailing list, as well as once you do join the platform. So two things. One thing, we've created a system to register where you don't have to actually join. So you register, you attend a program, you check it out to see if it's something that you're interested in. And then perhaps if you're interested in joining, but you're struggling or you don't understand the technology, we just set up some separate time for you to just get on. And then once you're on and actually inside Outstanding Life, everybody is assigned to the tech corner. So we have a tech corner, and that we have a person there who is available 24/7 for the most part. And then we have, we post just articles on how to engage within the platform, how to make the best of it, how to create your profile, and then separately throughout the year, we're going to be scheduling these sort of like launch events where we go and we just invite people to come in, we show them what it is, and then we try to walk them through signing up. We find that signing up is like the hardest thing for people to do. Getting on and getting their profile created is probably the biggest barrier to actually accessing the programs. Once they're in, they're good to go.
Right. And so for people just coming in, you remove that barrier and kind of get to that later. Just trying to get people in the room first. I like that.
Yeah, just see if you like the content of what we're putting out. Mm-hmm. And if this makes sense for you, creating a profile. Cynthia and I have been talking about this a lot, less than 3 clicks, you're in, your profile is created. But we're also very cognizant of the reality that this is an all LGBTQ space or majority. So we have to be careful with cybersecurity and, inviting folks in, and we have to monitor that heavily as we kind of develop this, because unfortunately, that's the reality that we're living in. We know that there are people out there who are targeting us online. So we as a small team have to just be really careful about that. And although we're growing and it's exciting, it's also a little bit, we just have to prepare.
Yeah, and maintain that level of vetting and yeah.
Yes.
So we have time for one last question, which I see in the chat. This is a question for both of you. Do you have any tips to serve people who are members of both of your communities, or both visually impaired and a member of the LGBTQ community?
I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking about that because as you described, David, the way your process, I realized that that process probably would not work for much of our population because we have people who, and this was a surprise to me when I came. We have people who don't know how to answer the regular phone or can't dial the regular phone. Never mind get on a computer and do something with Facebook. So one of the things we've had to do is build in an option within, we use Zoom primarily with our consumers. And so we pay for an option where we can literally call them. So all they have to do is pick up the phone. I think we have had some success in working with folks who are LGBTQ in addition to being visually impaired, but it is a real challenge because they often are reticent to participate because of the fear that you described. We try to be quite inclusive. We, whenever we, during an intake, if someone identifies themselves with a different gender or, we do try to accommodate them and particularly to help them to go into groups that are going to be receptive. But it is a tall order, and because one of the greatest barriers we have is that people don't know enough about us unless they can search for us on the internet or a family member does it, because doctors unfortunately do such a poor job in general. They don't educate their folks that there is something that can be done, that there is hope, that there is there are available resources. We have an outreach barrier as well.
Similar on the reverse end of that, like you just said, Amy, not everyone who struggles with visual impairment is going to be comfortable on this platform, but we have had folks who struggle with vision and they do come. So we've had some of that, and you can see that they're struggling while they're putting their face up to the screen. I think that one of the things that we can do is talk to folks about their settings, their computer settings, in terms of just small things like font. And even as we are developing, that's a big conversation around just regular communication with elders, just around font and just things little tips that can help folks see what we're putting out. And then also maybe doing some education around, device things that you can put on your device to help you. I know there are certain screens and screen protectors and things like that might be able to help. So that is something down the line that we hope to accomplish.
Great, thank you. I think that's about the time that we have today. There are still more questions coming in the chat, so I'm glad that everyone's engaging and enjoying this conversation. Thank you, Amy and David, for being with us. If both or either of you are willing to put your contact information up in the chat so folks can reach out with more specific questions and keep the conversation going, that would be wonderful. Something new to think about as we continue on this path to accessibility and inclusivity. But now I'm going to pass the screen over to our friends and colleagues, Caitlin Coyle and Phil Bors. They'll talk about the Conversations Massachusetts programs that happened over the summer and activating socially connected spaces. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks, Nikki. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here with us this morning. Before we get into our presentation, I just wanted to sort of tee it up in terms of thinking about the next segment of the program, which is really around socially connected spaces. And this past year, the task force and its partners have worked both to physically create spaces that are sort of inviting for social connection, but also working on the Conversations project, which is about sort of using existing space and what do we do within that space to create connection. So really thinking about the activity that happens within the space. So I'm happy to have my friend and colleague Phil Boris here from Healthy Places by Design, who's going to get started talking with us about creating the physical space and what we've been up to in terms of that work. And then I'll end with profiling and talking about the Conversations MA project and some of our pilot events.
Hi, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I see some familiar faces here. Would you like, oh, very good. I have the slides. Great. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this amazing meeting and the opportunity to learn. Especially thank you, Anne, David, and Nikki for the work you're doing. I took a lot of notes. I really appreciate what your insights and the challenges that you're facing with your work. I'm with Healthy Places by Design, a national nonprofit working with local leaders and coalitions to support community-led efforts. So we work with funders who are investing in local community health, equity, and more recently, social connection initiatives. I'm so happy to share this time with you, Caitlin, who I've learned so much from over the 2 years. Today, I'll spend a few minutes talking about the importance of connected community spaces and share some images and a brief summary of work happening in Chinatown and Dorchester that Caitlin's also very familiar with. Next slide, please. So thank you, Sandra, and Antron for the video. I love the video that the Surgeon General started off with. It's a very strong statement about the public health implications of loneliness and social isolation. Released in May, this report is the closest thing we have to a national strategy on social connection. It confirms that we've become increasingly isolated, even though we're wired as humans to be socially connected with each other. One thing that'll be clear to you if you read through this is that social connection is critical for community health and well-being, not just individuals. So we need to start seeing this as a social determinant of health. If you don't have easy access to the report, I'm happy to put it in the chat as well as some other documents as well. Next slide, please. As Sandra mentioned at the beginning, the report presents these 6 pillars. I'm not addressing all of them today, but I do want to highlight the breadth of strategies for social connection. If you take a minute and see those pillars. So the strategies are pro-social policies, social connection in the health sector, digital environments, which our panel talked about, and how that can be a real challenge, and also an opportunity. Research and a culture of connection within institutions. The first one, though, the one I have circled, is about strengthening social infrastructure in communities. I recently came across this definition of social infrastructure, and I'll share it with you. It includes libraries, laundrettes and lidos, pizzerias, plazas and playgrounds, sidewalks, swimming pools, and schools. These are just some of the kinds of spaces and facilities that contribute to the public life of cities. I admit, though, I had to look up what a lido is. Next slide. Some good resources to follow if you're interested in this topic. Public spaces help create what some people refer to as weak ties. These are the connections and relationships that we're all familiar with. If we go to the grocery store or the coffee shop, or maybe even to church or to the school to pick up your kids or drop them off, or maybe you're attending school. These are the things that we form maybe very weak or momentary relationships with people. They're circumstantial, depending on who happens to be in the park or on the sidewalk or at the library. We may meet people in these public spaces only once, or we might see them every week when we walk or push a stroller. Sometimes they develop into deeper friendships. So the second article here from the New York Times is an example of that, where a group of friends met bringing their dogs to a community dog park. So again, I'll put these in the chat. And one more thing I'd recommend if you don't have enough books to read, is something that came out a few years ago called Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinberg, which really details the importance of social infrastructure for our community's well-being. Next slide, please. Last year, so earlier in 2022, not 2002, John Hancock was interested in improving well-being by investing in small projects to improve the social infrastructure in Boston. They reached out to us, Healthy Places by Design, to help think through what that might look like. We created Activating Boston in collaboration with the Age Strong Commission of the City of Boston, AARP Massachusetts. Sandra and Antron were in many meetings with us and discussions, and of course, Caitlin at UMass Boston. Last year, 2 nonprofits were awarded modest grants, just $25,000 a piece. The goal was for these one-year projects to help residents and neighborhood leaders create inclusive and intergenerational public spaces that build and support social connection, health, and well-being. The nonprofits that were chosen were Asian Community Development Corporation and Four Corners Main Streets, which I'll say a few words about, and both are nearing the completion of their work, and we're very excited about it. Next slide. Okay. Asian Community Development Corporation, or ACDC, has been working in Chinatown since 1987 to provide affordable housing and help build a thriving community. The Hudson Street Stoop project is part of ACDC's strategy to use arts, culture, and resident leadership to create spaces for healing and joy, and engages the community to co-create an art installation every 18 months. And we're in that cycle right now for their second. Next slide, please. This spot on Hudson Street is one of the few precious green spaces in Chinatown. In fact, a recent report of the city declared Chinatown was the most heat-stressed neighborhood in Boston. If you're familiar with it, you'll know that it borders on the expressways of I-93 and I-90. You can almost see it there to the back and the right. Next slide. This structure was the inaugural installation of a public art project called the Storytell and Sway. The project came out of months of workshops asking community members what they'd like to see in that space, and they involved a local artist to create a concept where people could gather and where ACDC could host community events. Next slide, please. Their current project has been following a similar path, working with community members to determine a vision for the space, work with local artists for the next installment, and decide from several different proposals. Next. They take this process very seriously. They structured it through a committee, which was made up of mostly residents of Chinatown. You can get a sense of some of the specifics here. And next slide, please. So this is the last one we have to show you for the Chinatown project. This is what we'll see very soon. It's called Dancing Dragon. This image is just a rendering, but we're really close to seeing the structure installed this fall. When we have the opening date confirmed, you are welcome to come see it. So we'd be happy to spread the word on that. We're really excited about it, and I know they are as well. And this structure, again, will stay up at least 18 months. So they'll do a lot of programming around it starting in the spring. Next slide. And the next. So Four Corners Main Streets leads the other pilot project in Dorchester. So their mission is to support a vibrant commercial district in the Four Corners neighborhood. They do this through supporting existing businesses and attracting new ones, marketing the district to visitors, potential visitors, enhancing physical appearance and safety in the built environment per se, increasing community connections. So both Four Corners and ACDC had a track record of what we call placemaking projects that improve not only pedestrian wheelchair, bicycle access and safety, lighting and things like that, but also the beautification and spaces for connection for people, that all of which are part of that social infrastructure that I was talking about. Unlike ACDC, Four Corners Main Streets has only one employee, and many of you know him, their director, Marcos Beleche, who, from what I can tell, seems to be the unofficial mayor of the neighborhood. It seems like every project he has some role or leadership of. This photo is an example of the way they've claimed or reclaimed space, both in public and private, for the use of garden spots and places to come together. Next. The Guild is a community-driven social enterprise and a key partner for creating social connection. The building itself is a former garage that's been transformed into a really special gathering place for the neighborhood. In fact, we had one of our learning meetings there earlier this year. Next. This is Mother's Rest Park. It's one of the few designated park spaces along Washington Street in the Four Corners neighborhood. As part of their longer term vision, they're working with city officials to improve this park because it's such a central place to hold community events outdoors. Next down, one more, there we go. So Marcos and his team are constantly busy keeping these tree pits on Washington Street in good shape, really to beautify the streetscape. Keeping up with something that's maybe seemingly trivial is a really important symbol to community members to know that someone cares about these small details. Next slide. As a one-person show, you can imagine how important it is that they engage volunteers, both young and old. John Hancock provided additional grants through the MLK Scholars Program, which gave them stipends, both ACDC and Four Corners Main Streets, for a summer youth program. These youth worked on physical projects, but they were also ambassadors, talking with residents about the activities and places where people would like to connect that Four Corners Main Streets can use to create a longer term plan. Next slide. And finally, they've been working to improve the parking space and landscape at the rail stop on Washington Street by holding events and activating that space that is otherwise you consider very, very drab, or you might not notice the space at all if you were using it to board the train or even park there. So they've been installing public art and having events. There's much more that they could have said than I'm representing just a few minutes of the impressive work they're doing. So hopefully you'll get a chance to visit them yourself. Caitlin, thanks again for allowing me to say a few words about this project. I really look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Phil. That was great. And I know that those two projects have been they're really been working hard on them and engaging the community, and they're just a small piece of what both of those communities are up to in terms of trying to create more socially connected spaces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project or initiative that we've been working on as a task force this past year, what we're calling Conversations MA. And this is an example of something that can be done within public space to activate social connection among people. And it's based loosely or not so loosely around the Let's Talk New York initiative, which is really what I think of as trying to reinvent or reinvigorate what it means to talk to one another. I think especially as humans, we have a long history of using dialogue and conversation to advance our society. But between the COVID pandemic and other societal changes, including technology, it seems that sometimes the art of conversation, we get out of practice or it gets a little lost. And so this Conversations MA project is an example of how we sort of reinvent or remind people the value of face-to-face conversation. So it's based on people coming together to connect, to meet neighbors, to renew friendships, to talk to each other, and to generally renew a sense of community. It's very broad in terms of, the idea is that it's the ultimate goal is to connect connect individuals. How that gets done is often through sort of a pop-up mechanism, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think it's intended to be rather loose so that communities and individuals can make these conversations work specifically in their community. So a little bit more about the sort of model. As I mentioned, it's pop-up in nature. It's this idea of identifying public space in our community, perhaps where there are people already gathering, like a park or a community event, and creating conversation tables where people with prompts, where people can drop in and engage in conversation with one another. It's really sort of meant to be a free-flowing sort of open house kind of an event, but it's a physical reminder in our spaces of taking a moment, sitting down and talking with one another about nothing in particular in this case. Although prompts are often generated, the idea is that these are not agenda-driven conversations. So it's not a forum for engaging in political discussion or thinking about particular, arguing over particular community issues. It's really about how do we engage one another in terms of sharing our life experiences, sharing our thoughts and feelings about very generic and general things. So it's really meant to be social and not so much agenda driven. So we hosted about half a dozen of pilot conversations around Massachusetts over the course of the past 6 months. And I wanted to share some examples of those conversations with you all and hear about the impact of this work in community, as well as to share with you all opportunities for how you in your own communities can think about hosting or trying to host a conversation table in your own community. So as Phil mentioned, the Four Corners, the Guild in the Four Corners area of Boston is actually where we held our first conversation. And I have a couple of videos that I wanted to share with you from that event. And you can see in the photo here, Marcos Beleche, which Phil referenced, is one of the hosts of the conversation that happened there.
Allowed us to let the good things surface to the top, right? Because I think that most times, it's like you want to vent with somebody, right? That's the first thing that needs to come out. But I think here, having the conversation about when we witness unity in the community, or just like acknowledging the pieces that resonated with us, I think that was really important. If we were sort of running into each other somewhere, we probably would just get right to it's a horrible day, it's this, it's that, sharing our problems as opposed to sharing our blessings. Yeah. Allowed us to let
All right, so it sounds like maybe you heard the video, but you weren't able to see it, which I apologize for. But I think hearing it is what's most important. And so this comments from Marcos, I think, illustrate the value of having these conversations as a way of engaging. In this case, one of the prompts that was used is, tell us about a time you witnessed unity in your community. And the other prompt that we used was, tell us about the last time you had a meaningful conversation. And so Marcos, commenting on the fact that we created space for people to talk about the positive aspects of the community and the things in their community that make it great, which I think is, was a great byproduct of that work. And this is another video from another participant at that Dorchester conversation.
I think it's really important to have hard conversations for people to come together and challenge each other. I feel like a lot of the time we're kind of, yesing each other, agreeing with each other, but it's important to really have conversations where they're challenging and they cause us to kind of accept things that we haven't had to deal with before, or accept ourselves. I think.
So there is another example from that same conversation of a participant talking about the fact that having space to talk to one another allows us to get at some of the dynamics in our conversations instead of just simply agreeing with each other, because it's easier than engaging in conversation, and the value of having a space to do that, which really contributed to their experience. So in addition to Dorchester, we also had conversations in Lawrence. I know Melissa Donegan is on the Zoom with the watch party that's happening up in Lawrence. So shout out to Melissa and her group. So they held a conversation both in Spanish and English in their community at a local park. And what I have here are the prompts that they used to invite conversation. So they had tables set up with these prompts posted, talking about, if you had a superpower, what would it be? What does family mean to you? What brought you to Lawrence? And what would you like to see in your neighborhood and community to build connections? So again, really broad things, tapping into people's lived experiences and their own ideas. And I wanted to see if Melissa was still here and able to unmute if you wanted to say a few words about your experience in Lawrence.
Hi, Caitlin. Yep, I am still here. Yeah, we had a great time. So we attended the farmers market that happens in Lawrence every Wednesday. So we knew that we would have a group of people there, and we set up over by the tables where folks play dominoes. So we were getting some eyes that we were taking their tables, but they ended up really enjoying having the conversations. So you can see here the baby carriage. So that brought a lot of folks over. We had our youngest little participant, Dylan, at 7 months old, but we had a wide variety of folks join us that day. These are just a few of the pictures, but it was a really great day. And I did share with our planning group, we had one gentleman who stopped by who really didn't want to take part, but he kind of wouldn't go away. He was lingering. And one of our community nutritionists happened to have some historical pictures from Lawrence. And she just said, hey, did you know this about this particular picture? And he ended up staying the longest. And so she was able to engage in conversation with him, not through the prompts, but through these pictures. And then, you know, it kind of led from there. So we had really great feedback, and we're going to continue to do these conversations, you know, through other events that we have planned throughout the year.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And what a great example of how unstructured, the value of having these conversations be so unstructured. And it's really about just creating the space and the sort of physical reminder to people of stopping and chatting. And not formal in terms of how, you know, we offer the prompts, but it's really about creating these spaces for people to engage with one another while they're out and about in the community. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
A third conversation that we had was in the town of Millbury. And I know that Juliette Marie is here on the call. She sort of helped to host the Millbury conversation along with the Millbury Council on Aging. And she was generous enough to talk with me a little bit about her experience, and I'll share that video with you as well.
When you use the word isolation and loneliness, it can mean a lot to different people. And for them to hear you and Sandra, you know, sort of talk about it, it was very helpful for them. And it guided those chat table conversations quite well. A lovely thing that I noticed, Caitlin, they all felt that it was a safe space for them to chat. I think that was really noticeable and important, because many of them had not chatted with each other because of, the COVID pandemic. So they were either masked or observing social distancing. But here we were sitting around round tables. And I'm constantly encouraging them to go to the senior center, come out of their apartments. It's okay. And for many, it's one of their daily challenges. And so when we had the conversation with the Millbury Council on the Aging, that came up because some of the people who were chatting said, well, I know it's an effort to get out of your pajamas. I know it's an effort to, comb your hair and maybe, put on lipstick, makeup, whatever. It's an effort to present, to go outside of your home. And we were chatting about how it's an effort, but once you're out and engaging and connecting with the community, it's a world of difference. When you also want isolation.
So I think that's a really a wonderful way of articulating the experience that they had in Millbury, which actually also was really focused on some of the public housing residents, where they felt like isolation was particularly challenging in terms of getting people to come out and engage with one another. So thank you to Juliette Marie for sharing her experience and for hosting that conversation. And I just wanted to talk about one more of the conversations that we hosted, which was in the town of Billerica. That actually just happened very recently. So it's our most recent conversation. And here are some photos from that day. And we are lucky to have Jean Bushnell from the Billerica Council on Aging, who helped to host this event here with us on the call. So Jean, do you want to tell us a little bit about the prompts you used and the energy at the event?
Yes, thank you so much, Caitlin. As we all are piloting these events, there is an annual event in town called Yankee Doodle Weekend. And we sort of just got permission to set up outside of Town Hall in that green space. We created a group of people to pull it together. We had to move furniture a bit of a distance from the Council on Aging to that space, but we had a lot of volunteer help. One of the things that worked against us was the fact that Saturday was supposed to be a big storm, so everybody was kind of running towards the vendor tables, but we still were able to attract about 20 people, and we had different kinds of things happening. For example, you see the police chief, he just sat down with his family and he said, come and meet me and talk about anything. And so people just came by and they talked to him. There's a photo there of my stepdaughter and her husband, and there is Wesley and Jackson. They wanted to run off, but my stepdaughter has just moved to Billerica, and she talked all about moving to Billerica and what it meant, etc. And then this wonderful family just below me, these kids wanted to run off, but their mom kept them back. We had some little giveaways at the table. And she also talked about being a new immigrant in town and what it went. We had a high school student talk about the amount of homework she was getting and how she was managing that. We had a conversation about a guy who, unfortunately, his wife passed away and her social security went, and he talked about the struggles. And so it was just a wonderful array. Some of the lessons learned was we need to be more in a high traffic area because we're a little isolated off, but we've saved all of our stuff. The Lions Club helped us buy some t-shirts. We've saved everything, and we're just going to keep appending ourselves to all kinds of events in town. And for us, this was basically a start, and it was a great start. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, Jean. And what a wonderful idea to keep attaching yourself to events that are happening in town, to continue learning. And I think that's another lesson learned that we all took away from this experience, is that you could have one table, you could have 6 tables, you can really make these conversations what work for your own community, and thinking about existing events or creating the space and the event around the conversation. But really the tool of providing some space, some seating essentially, and some prompts, and just physically being present out in the community to remind people the joy and the value of sitting down and talking with one another, I think is really at the heart of this Conversations project. And I just want to encourage that there isn't one way to do this. There's lots of, it looks different in every community, and that's one of the beauties of this model. So with that, I wanted to just sort of remind folks on the call of ways that they can host a conversation in your own community. We as a task force did develop a bit of a toolkit with some more sort of practical and logical tips and tricks, which I'm happy to send you. If you send me a note, I'll send you a copy of that toolkit. I also wanted to point to our next presenter, who is Kara Solomon. Before I turn things over to her, just to mention that her organization, Everyday Boston, is another great resource in terms of thinking about how do I create opportunities for people to talk to one another in our communities. I also wanted to share the contact information for the conversations that I just featured, folks who've done this at least once, who are willing to share their experiences and provide some guidance to anyone who's interested in hosting a conversation in their own area. And lastly, to remind you all that if you do host a conversation, we'd love to hear about it and learn from you as we continue to propagate these conversations around the state. This is just the beginning, and we have found that the value of this work, and I think really the fact that it's I'm not going to say low effort, because I know there was a lot of effort put in, but the barrier to entry here is we tried to keep it low. So the idea is that this is something you can pick up and make happen in your community relatively easy to do. And we hope that we can continue these conversations around our state to remind people of the value of connecting with one another through conversation. So with that, I will do my best to answer any questions that have come up in the chat. I'll probably respond to you directly there. I want to turn things over to my colleague, Kara Solomon, who is the founder and director of Everyday Boston, and she's going to talk a little bit about our experience, the experiential learning opportunity that we have available to us today in the breakout rooms. So Kara, take it away.
I've made that rookie mistake of muting myself. Okay. I think we're all set. Okay. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I just want to say that I am so inspired by the work that's happening out there and everything that we've heard on this call. So thank you all for doing that work and for inviting me to sort of bring some of our work into this space. So as Caitlin said, my name is Kara Solomon. I'm the founder and executive director of Everyday Boston. We are a nonprofit that bridges divides between people across the city and across the state through the sharing of life stories. So this Conversations campaign or initiative or project, whatever we're calling it, is totally up our alley. This is what we love to do. And so we've been out there all summer actually setting up conversation stations at different community events. And so I am going to share my screen. Let's see and then we're going to do, oh, by the way, the breaking news is we are going to try a conversation station. We are going to do a conversation, not try it, on this call and with all of us, which is going to be fun. So hold on. Let's see if I can get the technology right. All right, here we go. Nobody look at my messy thing. Okay. All right, welcome to today's conversation station. So yeah, so you can see, we sort of go out there in the community like everyone else has been doing with our little, banner and our story prompts, and people choose a prompt and then they sit down and have a conversation. That's Kent. Okay. Here we go with Shay. I want to take you to the streets of Dorchester. A couple of weeks ago, we went to a community event. Just going to hear 40 seconds from Shay talking about why he thinks this is meaningful.
How you doing? My name is Shay Poe. This is the conversation station. It's developed for the community to come out and hopefully get something off their chest. Some people just need to, say their experience in life, or if it was a bad day. Sometimes, it's therapeutic. So it's important that as a community, we help each other here. And sometimes it's having a conversation, getting stuff off your chest in the process of healing. So that's what we're here doing today. And hopefully, if you don't come through, we can come to you. So take care.
Okay. Well, let's see whether this will work.
No,
Nope, I knew this was gonna happen. All right, let's try. There we go. Okay. So what's the plan for today? This is super easy. I'm hoping that everyone takes off their thinking caps. If you're here representing an organization or whatever, you're just going to throw that right out the door, because this is just all about connecting as human beings. So number one, we're going to give you I'm going to give you 3 story prompts that are basically universal life experiences. So for all of our differences, right, all the different details of our lives, we share the human experience. So these are going to be 3 prompts around that. You're going to choose one that you like. Then you're going to gather with your neighbors. In other words, we're going to send you into breakout rooms with groups of 3. And then one person's going to start sharing their story based on the prompt that they chose. And other people are going to ask questions just like you would in a normal conversation, right? We've all kind of lost the rhythm of that with the pandemic. So I'm going to here we are. A few tips, just in case, a refresher, right? A few tips for how to help people feel comfortable sharing their stories. It's kind of the stuff that we do all the time. So hopefully it's helpful. It's all stuff that you all know that, you've used in your own relationships, but just some reminders. The power of listening. So, right, if it's possible for, you to come on camera, if it's possible to, put away your phones, close your tabs, that's an important piece of sharing stories with folks. Okay, encouraging statements are awesome. Sometimes we forget to do this, right? If you react to something a person has said, it can make them feel a little bit less alone, because people get really self-conscious about whether they're being interesting, whether people are listening to them. So if you give them a little, I'm sorry you went through that, or that's amazing, or wow, these are really basic tips, but it's good to help remind us. Okay. And the big thing that we've learned, and I've learned, I used to be a reporter, is that when you're trying to encourage somebody else to share their story, big and broad questions are the best, instead of these specific ones. If somebody says, I went to lunch with my grandmother last week. And, if you ask, where did you go? What did you eat? You're not going to get a story, right? But if you sort of get to the point where you're sort of saying, what is your grandmother like? Then you're going to get a story, right? And when you ask these broad questions, big and broad questions, it gives people a lot of power over where they start their story, where they end it, and what the pace is. And so you always want to give people the most power over sharing their own stories, because that makes people feel safe. So, okay, ready? Here are the story prompts. Tell me about a time you did something you never thought you could do. Tell me about a time you felt free. And tell me about a time you took a leap of faith. So we're going to drop those into the chat box. Just a few things before we do. I just want to say that these prompts are designed to sort of suit your mood. If you are in a mood where you don't really want to share a lot of yourself, then you should be able to find something to talk about with these prompts. If you want to go deep, you should also find something. So tell me about a time you did something you never thought you could do. If I'm in a certain kind of a mood, I might tell you about the first time I traveled by myself, which was a big deal. And now I only travel by myself because I love it. Or if I'm in a certain kind of other mood, I could tell you, about a surgery that I had that I was really terrified to go through, and I got through it. So people end up talking about very deep things with each other, but there's no need to do that if you're not in the mood to do that. So, Okay, so here's how it's going to go, right? As I said before, one person chooses a story, a prompt, or the prompts should be in the chat. And one person just decides to start sharing their story. Obviously, you introduce yourselves, but please no affiliation, work affiliations. Let's just do it as humans. One person starts sharing, and the other folks in the breakout room just listen, follow their curiosity, and have a conversation. This is what we've been doing since the beginning of time. We're just getting back to it. And we're going to do this for 20 minutes. And then we're going to come back and share. And just a sort of quote to send you off. Some of these conversations may be totally fascinating to you. Some of them may not, but there is a lot of worth in just literally connecting with somebody that you might not otherwise know. So you just I would encourage everyone to keep that in mind. So this quote, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some good conversations, at least some good connections. You did it. Some people are, it can be a little intimidating to talk to people you don't know. You did it. Yay. What I would ask is, how did it go? Drop one word into the chat to describe how you feel right now. Could be any kind of word, but just any kind of adjective. I'll just drop them all in, get a sense of things. Okay. By the way, all these cartoons are people we know or we've worked with. So there we go. All right. Good. So just a little sort of kind of a debrief. I'm just curious, and these are just guiding questions, but feel free to answer whatever you want. Any reflections, what stood out to you, what surprised you, what challenged you, any takeaways for connecting with people in your own life. I remember we do this sometimes with teenagers, and one of the teenagers said to me, "This is going to be great for dating." But anyway, so yeah. So I don't think we need to keep these up. Maybe I'll just take it away, and let's see whether folks have thoughts.
How easy it was to just connect. I mean, begin to speak, and it just flowed.
It's great, right? When it works, it's really great. I think stories are like, I like to think of them as the connective tissue between humans. We've been sharing stories since the beginning of the time in the caves to connect. So if other folks if people are raising their hands, I'm not really good with this technology. So maybe Antron, if you might be able to jump in and.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to Joyce.
Oh, thank you. I don't have to unmask myself. As I told the people in my group, I'm not physically ready to be viewed. I thought it was great. We may have had different stories, but we all seem to have had similar challenges in putting ourselves out there. One of our people had, unfortunately, a lot of technical difficulties getting into the she wasn't audible, but she was able to put her message in the chat, and it was fantastic. It was a good degree of sharing, a good, I think, support for all of us, and validation. It's good to be heard.
It's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you, Joyce. Uju?
Hello, everyone. My name is Uju. I'm with LBFE. In my room, I think something that really stood out to me is how much of an effect societal pressures can have on us, to the point where we don't think to question some of the practices we have, and creating spaces that allow people to exist without having to live or deal with those practices. I thought it was really interesting. We were kind of just talking about alcohol and how it's so ingrained in our society that if you were to say no, you don't want to have a drink, everyone looks at you as if you've created a social slight. So it was really interesting, and I think it could really be applied to a lot of things in everyone's life, honestly.
So interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Thoughts? Others?
I was just gonna say that, sometimes, it takes a few minutes to kind of get warmed up. And so I think it's one of those things that, initially you feel a little bit awkward and start with your typical introductions, but, kind of once you get going, like it does flow and it comes so easily. And it was, it was really a fun experience.
Good, I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I think there's sometimes no way around the awkwardness in the beginning. You just kind of got, we all sort of live in, not all of us, but I think oftentimes I do sometimes, live in fear of that awkwardness. You just have to push on through because there's such good stuff on the other end of it, on the other side of it. And I think it's really interesting that there sometimes, I haven't looked really in the chat box, so I can't see the words, but when we do this out in the community, we have sticky notes and we get people to write down the words. And it's really interesting to see what people write. And oftentimes the word relieved comes up, which I find really interesting. I find that fascinating. I think, sometimes people just need to share, but also I think there's this idea, that it could be, you could be judged, or is this going to be a safe way, to interact with another human being? And I think there can be that relief that this was a positive interaction with a stranger, you never know. Yeah.
All right, Kara, we have Kara Cohen.
Hey, everybody. I found that I broke one of the rules right away, which was that I couldn't help but mention work or inquire about somebody's work, only because I was trying to make connections fast with the 3 other people in the breakout room, and it was just a nice way to know how we might be connected. But I think it's a nice rule to try to keep to at times, to not talk about work. That's something I'll consider for my other social interactions that I have out and about.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, and we're all trying to do good work together. And so you want to make those collaborations, but I think that, it's harder to get to the meaningful stuff. It's harder to get those different connections, the deeper connections. So, but I find myself doing the exact same thing. So I'm with you. Yeah. Others, anything surprising? Was it challenging, more challenging than you imagined, less challenging, more or less meaningful?
Hi.
Jackie?
Thanks very much, Kara. I was in a group with 2 others, Yuen and Joy, and I didn't hear, I guess I wasn't paying attention when you said not to speak about work. Anyway, that's because that is how we started off. And which I think is almost, it can be a little perfunctory sometimes, but it wasn't here because it was interesting. And because it's almost like people say, well, hi. And then, automatically they say, how are you? It's like, a handshake in a way.
Yes.
And we actually got into 2 of us spoke about a question, and fortunately I offered to go last, so I didn't have to. But it was very, I was trying to think which question. But it was a very interesting conversation, and it could have gone for much longer and more in depth in terms of understanding or being empathetic or those sorts of feelings, if in some situations. So I think that I always find in breakout groups that they're never long enough.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think the work thing is it's an aid that we all can rely on, and it makes total sense. And, we run these workshops called Curiosity and Connection workshops. And as we're doing them, it sort of encourage people. Of course, you're going to ask the factual questions about each other. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're sort of trying to really get to the meaningful connection, then going into these life experiences can be really helpful. The stories can take you there.
I think we had 2 more hands. Joanna, did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I found it very insightful. I don't usually like to speak. I dreaded it when you said we were going to go into breakout rooms. It's like, oh, now I have to actually engage. you know, but I did the same thing. I added my work, but my reason for doing that was my answer had to do with work, you know. So
You got a pass then, Joanne. Just kidding. Yeah.
So, but it was nice. It actually is. Once I get to talking, I guess it happens. But even afterwards, my anxiety is like, oh my gosh, I did it, you know. But it was great. It was a good experience for me, and my group was really good too. So
I'm so grateful for you I mean, it's always it's always a little risk when you're sharing a piece of your life with somebody. So just grateful to everyone for trying it, you know.
Thank you.
And our last person would be Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Antron. It was an unexpected pleasure to be in a group with one other person this morning. Being on this session was a leap of faith for me because I have many other things to do, but the topic was so interesting and everything that's been discussed has been really informative. But having the opportunity to share something about myself when that's not what I started out to do this morning was it was really reaffirming my story, to have it validated by Karen, who is in my group, and both of us have been sitting off camera listening. And she was brave enough to come on camera just as I was, and she had a wonderful story. And I just felt really honored to have a virtual stranger and a literal stranger share such a personal story with me, and it made me comfortable enough to share my story with her. So this was a wonderful addition to my day. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you. Thank you for taking the risk again. Okay. Antron, are we out of time? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. I'll drop my email in the chat. If anyone would like to get in touch, collaborate, partner, whatever it might be, happy to provide any advice if folks need it for the conversation stations. So that's it. Thank you.
Wasn't that wonderful? So folks, let's go out and multiply. We can't wait to hear about all the conversations you will be starting in your community. So as we move forward, to keep up with our success and the growing demands of the task force, we have expanded our strategic leadership model. Joining Caitlin Carl and me as co-leaders of the task force are Jean Bushnell, Director of the Billerica Council on Aging, and Jennifer Lawrence, the Chief Strategy Officer at HSpan. Please join me in welcoming Jen and Jean as they share our plans for moving forward in the new year.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thanks again. What we're going to do here is Jen is actually going to lead the forward motion, but I just want to recap where we've been and how this morning has gone. It's been phenomenal. I think what we did was reinforce the fact that social health is an important aspect of living. And we want to applaud Sandra, Caitlin, and other members of the community who had the vision and the motivation in the spring of 2019 to recognize the importance of this subject and mobilize around community members and organizations to get started. We want to applaud the statewide coalition that is now 103 members strong with 45 statewide communities. And we're all committed to one essential mission and vision, and that is to ensure that the residents of the Commonwealth feel connected and experience a strong sense of social health. The thing that we elaborated on today was the fact that we started with lonely seniors, but now we've expanded that to include so many new members of our neighborhood, everything from persons with vision impairments, persons who are disabled, caregivers, family members, and all of those groups that are equally important. So the evidence is clear. Being disconnected from other people has serious consequences for both mental and physical health. And I'm going to turn it over to my valued colleague, Jen Raymond, who's going to paint a picture of where we're heading. And we're so glad you all joined us today to combine our efforts to advance. Jen?
Thank you, Jean, and Sandra, and thank you all for joining us today. You know, I have to admit, when I looked at the calendar yesterday and saw this, I was like, oh gosh, that's 2 hours. And what, you know, it'd be 2.5 hours. And I just want to thank everyone for making this some of the most engaging and productive 2.5 hours I've had this week.
Yes.
Making time to invest in just connecting with folks around a common vision, a common mission, a common passion is so meaningful, and we don't always make the time to foster that. So thank you all. I hope you have been as inspired as I have from hearing about the different work that's already happening out there in our communities across the Commonwealth to not just address loneliness and isolation, but to eliminate loneliness and isolation. And anytime we set forth with that kind of movement, that kind of change, stuff we're talking about today, it's really critical that we have some sort of clear direction and vision for what we want the future to look like, both for ourselves doing the work and for the communities that we serve. What's the work we want to do? What are the ways we want to engage communities? What are the ways we want to empower communities to lead themselves through this? And who are the partners that we need alongside this work so we can really be positioned for success over the long haul? So to that end, many of you are aware that this year we started I'm going to call it a strategic discovery process to, you know, sort of begin the work of setting forth that direction to get us to a world without loneliness or isolation. We have been really blessed and thrilled to come at this at the perfect time. We know it's important, and now the Surgeon General has said it's critical. It's an epidemic, and so to have that support and leadership at the national level, that just the timing could not be better for us to collaboratively advance this movement. So you've heard today, Phil talked about it and Sandra talked about it, those 6 pillars. And those 6 pillars, I'm going to just share my screen for a bit here, if I can just move my tools around. Those 6 pillars, you're going to hear so much more from this task force and from all of us here around how we operationalize strategically those 6 pillars across Massachusetts. And we won't go through all of them this time in great detail, because time certainly won't allow that. But, you know, as we're going through these pillars, be thinking in your mind, you know, what can I do as an individual, as an organization, as a community member? What can I do to advance this this work? And we're gonna be reaching out to everyone to get more details and more information from you. But we've had such good conversations in the chat throughout the 2.5 hours today. And I encourage folks, if you're going through these with us now, and there's something that you think like, here's something I want to do, or here's something I can do to strengthen social infrastructures, pop it into the chat. Let's continue the conversation and the learning that way. This first pillar is just that, strengthening social infrastructure in local communities. You heard Phil talk a lot about design environments. We talked about housing and green space and scaling community connection programs like Conversations MA, and our many conversations that we had were, so engaging, investing in community-based organizations that are already doing this work, that are embedded in the community and have relationships of trust with diverse populations. How do we bring them under this larger tent to share their learnings around, making sure we bring everyone who has a challenge with loneliness and isolation into focus, into visibility, and address that. We hear from many area agencies on aging, for example, including AgeSpan, thinking about how do we build intergenerational housing that fosters connection. I'll give you an example. We had a partner who said, I'm going to build some housing, but I want to build a bunch of tiny homes on a piece of property, and it's one person per home or two people per home. And we had a deep discussion about what about that model supports connectedness and integration, and what about that model hinders those things. So think about those kinds of things in terms of that pillar. Another pillar here is enacting pro-connection public policies. So we hear a lot about things like aging in all policies, connection in all policies. So when we're talking about, building new transportation, how do we make sure the bus stops and the T and the trains are accessible to folks who might be isolated, so that they can come together in places like the conversations? We had some talk in the chat today about public awareness campaigns, perhaps a public awareness campaign about the vital role of volunteers in addressing isolation and the impact on the volunteer themselves when they participate and engage. And for us here in Massachusetts, that's going to be how do we collaborate with the work that's happening on the age-friendly side, on the dementia-friendly side, so that we're all certainly having our expertise, but rowing in the same direction. Mobilizing the health sector, training healthcare providers to be on the lookout for signs of loneliness and isolation. Many of the healthcare providers we're seeing community organizations work with are starting to do a loneliness screening and an assessment. So how do we take the results of those screenings that say somebody might be at risk for isolation and connect them with the valued community resources that will help them overcome that? Reforming digital environments. We talked a lot about this today, and David brought us some great information in terms of digital access and bridging the digital divide. There are many grants that have been awarded in the last couple of months and years that are going to look at technology as ways to promote connectedness. Even technology like the television, and Sandra and her team have led this amazing series that we'll continue to do called Connect TV. And if you haven't watched any Connect TV episodes, please go jump on YouTube and search for that. Like, how do we use and support technologies that bring us together, as opposed to technologies that have us all individually staring at our own screens? And then I think this is the last one, this last pillar around continuing to deepen our knowledge across generations, across cultures, across race, across ability, developing and investing in the right kind of research that tells us this kind of connection activity works really, really well, and this kind doesn't, so that we are investing in those things that have positive outcomes. Can't do any of this without sustainable funding. So how do we make sure the organizations that are taking on this mission of supporting connection have the appropriate funding? This example today, our fourth, Sandra, shake your head yes or no, our fourth Good Neighbor Summit is a really powerful way to increase that public awareness and increase the number of people around the table thinking about this. And there are all kinds of examples of that. There's a pilot happening right now in Lawrence and in Lowell, both in the Merrimack Valley region, where the Federal Administration for Community Living is investing in a social isolation pilot that gives restaurant vouchers out to older adults who are food insecure, so they can actually go to a restaurant, get transportation to the restaurant, sit down, have a meal with a friend, have a meal with a caregiver, have that level of engagement, order what they want from a healthy menu, and have that time of connectedness. And that's federally funded work. How do we increase that kind of work? So, you know, as you can see, there's been a lot of great things that have happened, and even more really powerful things that are coming to fruition. And we really look forward to continuing the work with all of you around that. So thank you very much. And Jean, I'll pass it back to you.
Yes, what I think we're underscoring, beyond the fact that the 6 pillars are basically part of the fabric of our work and how much has already gone on. This is our work. It is our work, OUR. We all have a piece to contribute, and we are learning together. We are basically gathering all the great work that's happening at a grassroots level. And as Jen so clearly put forward, we are going to be capturing your work under these 6 buckets, so to speak, and multiply and move from these 6 platforms. So we just want to thank you very much for coming forward today to be a part of this 4th summit. And you will be hearing from us, the 4 of us who are involved in directing the next phase of the work. And once again, go out there, get connected, feel connected, and bring forward the great work you're doing under the umbrella of reducing isolation and building social connectivity. Thanks once again. Sandra, back to you.
Well, I think this concludes our program for this year, our 4th annual summit. We look forward to continuing this work. We renew our commitment to doing the work that we started 4 years ago, and we thank everyone for being with us and being a part of today's activities. So farewell, and we hope to stay connected. Please join us by visiting endlonelinessma.com. Become a part of this movement, and we look forward to working with you and expanding this work, and especially being a part of the national agenda. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to all of our program leaders, people who participated, our panelists, and thanks to everyone for joining the conversations. And again, we look forward to hearing about all the great work you're doing and that we continue to do. As Jean has said, this is our work, and we take full responsibility for making sure we are successful. So thanks to everybody, and have a good rest of the day.